Welcome back to the deep dive. We're going to be taking a closer look at some excerpts you've shared from Whitney Webb's One Nation Under Blackmail.
Oh, yeah.
And
Great book.
it delves into some pretty shadowy connections between intelligence agencies, organized crime, and powerful figures. And honestly, just glancing through what you sent over, it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a dense read.
Yeah.
But the excerpts you've chosen, I think, really highlight a pattern of intelligence agencies, particularly during the Cold War,
Right.
utilizing organized crime for covert operations.
Yeah.
It definitely makes you think about the ethical lines
Oh, yeah.
intelligence agencies are willing to cross
Yeah.
and what the long-term consequences of those choices might be.
It's a bit unnerving to think about, isn't it? And it jumps right into it, starting with William Wild Bill Donovan during World War II.
Yeah.
He was the head of the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, which was basically the precursor to the CIA, right?
That's right. And what's interesting about Donovan's approach is that his office wasn't just focused on traditional spying.
Okay.
It became this hub for propaganda, shaping public opinion
Wow.
towards supporting U.S. involvement in the war.
So it wasn't just about gathering intel, it was about actively influencing how people thought about the war.
Exactly.
Okay.
The excerpts even mention his work with a British intelligence operative, William Stevenson,
Okay.
and their use of this idea of a fifth column
Okay.
to create fear and distrust among Americans.
Right.
They were alleging this secret network of Nazi sympathizers was operating within America.
Wow. That's a pretty powerful way to sway public opinion.
Yeah.
It sounds like it created an atmosphere where people were more willing to accept going to war.
It definitely played a role.
Yeah.
And it's here with the OSS that we start to see these early connections between intelligence operations and organized crime.
Okay.
The OSS started working with figures like Lucky Luciano,
Oh, wow.
a notorious mob boss.
Why would they turn to someone like Luciano? It seems like a risky move.
Well, the OSS believed that Luciano, with his influence over dock workers,
Right.
could help prevent sabotage and even provide intel on Axis activities.
Oh, okay.
They saw him as a valuable asset, despite his criminal background.
So in their pursuit of victory, they were willing to make deals with the devil, so to speak.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And those deals had repercussions that lasted long after the war ended.
Okay.
In fact, after the war, naval intelligence actually pushed for Luciano's release from prison.
Seriously. They campaigned to get a mob boss out of jail.
It's surprising, right?
Yeah.
And even more surprising is that Thomas Dewey,
Okay.
the very man who put Luciano behind bars,
Right.
commuted his sentence in exchange for Luciano being deported to Italy.
Hold on. So the U.S. government helped a mob boss escape further punishment.
In a way, yes.
Wow.
But what's even more concerning is that Luciano's deportation didn't actually sever his ties with U.S. intelligence.
Right.
Instead, it actually helped him build a transnational organized crime network,
Wow.
deeply connected to American intelligence agencies.
That's a pretty disturbing thought.
Yeah.
The very people tasked with fighting crime actually helped to create a global criminal empire.
The excerpts definitely paint that picture.
Yeah.
And these connections didn't end with Luciano.
Right.
They go on to detail the involvement of figures like Frank Coppola,
Okay.
who was deported alongside Luciano, and even Jimmy Hoffa,
Okay.
the powerful union leader.
What were they doing mixed up with intelligence agencies?
Well, Coppola was allegedly involved in a massacre in Sicily,
Oh, wow.
potentially even financed by Donovan himself.
Seriously.
And Hoffa, with his control over the Teamsters Union,
Right.
became a key player in the CIA's attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro.
So we're seeing a pattern here.
Yeah.
During the Cold War, intelligence agencies were willing to blur the lines
Absolutely.
between law enforcement and criminal activity to gain an advantage over their adversaries. They made deals with some pretty unsavory characters.
It's a theme that runs throughout these excerpts,
Yeah.
and it gets even more complex when we look at how the opium trade intertwined with intelligence operations and powerful financial networks.
The opium trade. How does that fit into all of this?
This is where we see the influence of some powerful corporate dynasties, like the Keswick family and their company, Jardine Matheson.
Okay.
They had a long history in the opium trade and a significant impact on the development of Western intelligence services,
Wow.
particularly in Asia.
So these powerful families were profiting from the opium trade and also shaping intelligence operations in the region.
That's what the excerpts suggest.
Okay.
They specifically mention the KMT,
Hmm.
the Chinese Nationalist Party,
Right.
who fled to Burma after the communists took over China.
Right.
The KMT, backed by the CIA,
Okay.
became deeply involved in the opium trade,
Wow.
dramatically increasing production in Southeast Asia.
Wow, it sounds like the CIA was indirectly supporting the drug trade.
Yeah.
Where was all this opium going?
Well, a lot of it ended up in the U.S.,
Right.
funneled through organized crime channels.
Right.
The excerpts even mention a CIA-connected lawyer, Paul Helliwell,
Okay.
who may have been involved in laundering drug money through real estate in Florida.
It's incredible how these seemingly separate worlds,
Yeah.
intelligence agencies,
Mm-hmm.
organized crime,
Mm-hmm.
and these powerful corporations
Yeah.
all converged around the opium trade.
Absolutely.
And it seems like this nexus of influence extended to other prominent families like the Pritzkers.
You're right.
Okay.
The Pritzkers, a wealthy family from Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
built a massive fortune through investments.
Okay.
But the excerpts suggest they also utilized figures connected to organized crime to expand their empire.
Okay.
They worked with people like Sidney Korshak,
Okay.
a lawyer with ties to Al Capone and Meyer Lansky,
Wow.
figures deeply entrenched in organized crime.
Wait, so the Pritzkers, this prominent family, were working with mob lawyers. What were they doing?
Korshak was involved in several Pritzker ventures,
Okay.
including the Franklin Investment Company,
Okay.
which ended up dominating the hotel business in Columbus, Ohio.
Wow.
The Pritzkers were also heavily involved with Castle Bank and Trust in the Bahamas,
Okay.
a known haven for money laundering and organized crime.
So they were using this bank to hide illicit funds and potentially even finance criminal activities.
That's what the excerpts imply.
Yeah.
The client list for Castle Bank reads like a who's who of the criminal underworld, mob bosses, corrupt politicians, you name it.
Wow.
It really highlights how easily illicit funds could be moved around the globe
Yeah.
with the help of powerful institutions.
It's mind-boggling how far-reaching these connections were.
Absolutely.
But perhaps the most shocking revelation in these excerpts is about J. Edgar Hoover,
Yeah.
the longtime director of the FBI.
Right.
The excerpts suggest that he was potentially blackmailed by intelligence agencies and organized crime.
Interesting.
Which might explain his decades in power.
It's a fascinating theory.
Yeah.
The source suggests that Hoover was compromised using compromat,
Right.
possibly related to his alleged homosexuality.
Right.
And it begs the question, if the head of the FBI was vulnerable to these tactics,
Right.
who else was?
That's a scary thought.
It is?
It seems like these shadowy networks could target anyone, even the people meant to uphold the law.
Mm-hmm.
And this web of blackmail seemingly extended beyond Hoover.
Right.
The excerpts point to the Bronfman family, the folks behind the Seagram's liquor empire,
Yeah.
as having amassed their wealth through connections to organized crime, particularly Meyer Lansky.
The Bronfmans' rise during Prohibition was absolutely fueled by their willingness to collaborate with gangsters like Lansky.
Right.
They were supplying massive amounts of alcohol,
Right.
which solidified their fortune and established a network that would prove incredibly useful in the years to come.
So they were essentially partnering with criminals to build their empire?
The excerpt suggests as much. Yeah.
They even mention attempts to silence anyone trying to investigate the Bronfman family's past,
Wow.
indicating they were very protective of their image and their secrets.
Oh, yeah.
And this connection between powerful families,
Mm-hmm.
intelligence agencies, and organized crime continues with the Sunborn Institute,
Okay.
a group of wealthy Zionist individuals heavily involved in arms smuggling.
Great. Arms smuggling? How does that fit into this whole picture?
Well, the Sunborn Institute employed figures like Yehuda Arazi,
Okay.
a Haganah operative with a long history of arms trafficking.
Oh, wow.
They set up front companies to facilitate these operations,
Okay.
potentially even working with Paul Helliwell,
Right.
that CIA-connected lawyer we discussed earlier.
So it's this ongoing pattern of powerful individuals and organizations,
Yeah.
often with ties to intelligence agencies,
Hmm.
operating outside the law and engaging in illegal activities with the help of organized crime.
Exactly.
And the excerpts introduce Tibor Rosenbaum, a key figure in Mossad's financial operations,
Right.
as someone deeply embedded in this web of intrigue.
Interesting.
Okay, so who is Tibor Rosenbaum?
Well, Rosenbaum established the International Credit Bank, or ICB, in Geneva,
Okay.
which became a central hub for moving money for both Mossad and organized crime.
Wow, okay.
The excerpts imply that the ICB was involved in everything from laundering casino profits to financing arms deals.
So he was basically running this bank that catered to both spies and criminals.
That's the picture the excerpts paint. It's incredible how Rosenbaum was able to operate in this gray area,
Right.
blurring the lines between espionage, criminal activity, and legitimate finance.
Yeah.
And his network extended to figures like Shaul Eisenberg,
Okay.
a businessman involved in arms deals who had close ties to Liberia.
Liberia, what's the connection there?
At the time, Liberia, under the rule of Charles Taylor,
Okay.
was a haven for illicit activities like arms trafficking and money laundering.
Right.
Eisenberg's operations in Liberia.
Okay.
And his connections to Rosenbaum
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate how these networks could exploit weak states for their own gain.
It's truly disturbing how interconnected all of these worlds were.
Yeah.
And the excerpts also mention Permindex CMC,
Okay.
a World Trade Organization with alleged ties to intelligence agencies.
Interesting.
And figures like Clay Shaw,
Oh, wow.
who was implicated in the JFK assassination investigation.
Wow. That's a deep cut.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about Permindex CMC?
Well, the excerpt suggests that despite presenting itself as a legitimate business venture,
Right.
Permindex CMC was also involved in real estate deals with individuals connected to organized crime.
Oh, interesting.
This further reinforces the blurred lines between the corporate world,
Mhm.
intelligence operations,
Yeah.
and the criminal underworld.
Right.
Seems like everyone was in on the game.
The excerpts also introduce us to Louis Bloomfield,
Okay.
a Permindex CMC board member who also happened to be the lawyer for the Bronfman family.
Wow, small world.
His potential connections to intelligence agencies and his involvement in Permindex CMC's dealings
Right.
add another layer of complexity to this already tangled web.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, and with each layer we find more connections and more questions.
Absolutely.
But so far, this deep dive has revealed a disturbing pattern of intelligence agencies collaborating with organized crime and using their power to manipulate individuals and events.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious to learn more about Roy Cohn,
Okay.
a figure who seems to embody this nexus of influence.
Roy Cohn's story is a fascinating one.
Okay, so we're finally getting to Roy Cohn.
Yeah.
What's so significant about him?
Well, his upbringing is particularly interesting.
Okay.
His father, Judge Albert Cohn,
Mm-hmm.
had close ties to the Democratic Party machine in New York City,
Right.
specifically Tammany Hall,
Right.
which was notorious for its connections to organized crime.
So he grew up surrounded by this world of political maneuvering and shady dealings?
Exactly. Cohn's family connections exposed him early on to this world of political favors and backroom deals.
Right.
He learned how to build a system of connections and leverage them to his advantage.
Okay.
He called it his favor bank,
Right.
which operated a lot like the quid pro quo arrangements you'd see in organized crime.
So he was learning the tricks of the trade from a young age.
Yes.
And how did his legal career play into this?
His legal career further cemented his ties to the criminal underworld.
Okay.
The excerpts detail his involvement in the United Dye Stock swindle,
Right.
which exposed his long-standing connections to mob figures like Mo Dalitz,
Okay.
a close associate of Meyer Lansky.
It's like a spider web of connections, each one leading to another.
It is.
So Cohn was actively working with organized crime figures to manipulate the stock market.
It appears so.
Yeah.
His ability to navigate the legal system,
Right.
often bending the rules to benefit his clients,
Mm-hmm.
made him a valuable asset to organized crime.
Yeah.
He could shield them from prosecution and advance their interests through legal expertise and political influence.
It sounds like he was a master manipulator.
He was.
And what about his relationship with J. Edgar Hoover? The excerpt suggests that it was a bit complicated.
It was indeed.
Okay.
And it further highlights Cohn's entanglement in the world of intelligence and blackmail.
Right.
The excerpt suggests that Cohn may have even been involved in sexual blackmail operations,
Oh, wow.
potentially targeting Hoover himself.
So he was using compromise to control even the director of the FBI.
It's certainly a disturbing possibility.
Yeah.
This alleged collaboration between Cohn and Hoover in sexual blackmail schemes
Right.
points to a willingness to use the most personal and damaging information to gain leverage over others.
It's a chilling reminder of how power, especially when wielded in secret, can corrupt even those in positions of authority.
Absolutely.
And Cohn's influence extended beyond the legal and political realms. He would have a profound impact on a young Donald Trump, who would later become president of the United States.
That connection is fascinating.
Wait, Donald Trump? How was Cohn connected to him?
Cohn acted as a mentor to Trump,
Oh, wow.
teaching him the art of deal-making,
All right.
the importance of media manipulation,
Yeah.
and the ruthless pursuit of power.
Yeah.
Trump's relationship with Cohn and the lessons he learned from him
Right.
would have a lasting impact on his career in his presidency.
Wow, that's a fascinating connection.
It is.
So Cohn's influence potentially shaped the future president of the United States.
Yeah.
His story is truly a testament to how ambition, connections, and a willingness to operate outside the law can lead to immense power.
It's a reminder that these shadowy networks operate at the highest levels of power and influence.
Right.
And as we continue our deep dive, we'll explore how these connections have persisted,
Right.
adapting and evolving to new circumstances, ultimately shaping the world we live in today. It's fascinating how these threads of influence kind of weave through different eras and connect seemingly unrelated events.
Yeah.
And speaking of connections,
Right.
let's shift our focus to Robert Keith Gray,
Okay.
a powerful lobbyist and public relations executive.
Okay, Robert Keith Gray. I'm not familiar with that name.
Yeah.
What's his story?
Well, Gray's story is like something straight out of a spy novel.
Okay.
He had connections to both the CIA and organized crime,
Oh, wow.
working with figures like Edwin P. Wilson,
Okay.
a former CIA officer who ran his own private intelligence network.
A private intelligence network. So
Yeah.
like a mini CIA operating outside of official channels.
Exactly.
Oh.
And Gray's involvement with Wilson is particularly intriguing.
Okay.
Wilson's organization was involved in some pretty shady activities,
Like what?
like arms trafficking, training foreign military units,
Wow.
and other covert operations that were often at odds with official U.S. policy.
That sounds incredibly risky. Was Gray just a silent partner in these operations, or was he more actively involved?
He was far from passive.
Okay.
His name pops up in several major scandals,
Oh, wow.
including Watergate,
Okay.
the Page Boy scandal,
Right.
involving allegations of sex trafficking in Washington, D.C.,
Oh, wow.
and the Iran-Contra affair.
Wow. So he was right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
It seems like he was leveraging his connections to benefit himself and his clients, regardless of the law or any ethical considerations.
That's the picture that emerges.
Yeah.
And when you connect Gray's activities to the bigger picture,
Right.
it really highlights the dangers of unchecked power and influence.
Yeah.
He was able to operate in the shadows for years, pulling strings and making deals
Right.
that often had far-reaching consequences.
His story really makes you think about the need for greater transparency and accountability,
Yeah.
not just in government, but in the private sector as well.
Yeah.
It seems like these shadowy networks can operate with impunity
Mm-hmm.
as long as they have the right connections.
That's a key takeaway from these excerpts.
Right.
And speaking of shadowy networks,
Yeah.
the excerpts go on to discuss the Safari Club,
Oh,
a clandestine network of intelligence agencies
okay.
that collaborated with Shackley and Wilson's private network.
The Safari Club.
Yeah,
That sounds intriguing.
it is.
Jeez.
But the Safari Club is a fascinating example of Cold War intrigue.
Okay.
It was formed by intelligence chiefs
Right.
from countries like Saudi Arabia,
Okay.
Iran,
Mm-hmm.
Morocco,
Okay.
and France.
So a pretty diverse group.
They were united by a desire to operate outside the constraints of official channels,
Okay.
often pursuing agendas that were at odds with U.S. interests.
So it was this secret alliance of intelligence agencies working together in the shadows. What were their goals?
They had various objectives,
Right.
but they were generally focused on combating Soviet influence
Okay.
and pursuing their own national interest,
Right.
even if it meant undermining U.S. policy.
Right. Interesting.
For example, they were involved in supporting anti-communist groups in Africa
Okay.
and funneling weapons to various conflicts around the world.
It's mind-boggling to think about these secret alliances operating for so long with such secrecy.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much control governments really have over their own intelligence agencies.
The Safari Club's existence really challenges the traditional narrative of the Cold War.
Right.
It shows that the world was far more complex and interconnected than we often realize,
Yeah.
with shifting alliances and hidden agendas at play.
Were there any key players in this Safari Club?
Yeah.
Anyone who stands out as a central figure?
One individual who played a significant role was Adnan Khashoggi,
Okay.
a Saudi arms dealer
Right.
with connections to everyone from the CIA to the global elite.
Oh, wow.
He actually provided the initial meeting place for the Safari Club,
Wow.
further blurring the lines between intelligence agencies, private operators,
Yeah.
and the world of illicit finance.
Adnan Khashoggi, that name rings a bell. Wasn't he known for his lavish lifestyle
Oh,
and
yeah.
involvement in various scandals?
He was a larger-than-life character, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Khashoggi's story is a classic example of how money, connections, and access to power can facilitate shady dealings on a global scale.
Right.
He was a master of navigating the gray zones of international finance, often profiting from conflict and instability.
It sounds like he was the ultimate power broker,
Yeah.
connecting the dots between governments, corporations, and the criminal underworld.
Exactly.
And his connections to figures like Robert Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein add another layer of intrigue to his already complex story.
Absolutely.
Wow, it seems like every thread we pull leads to more tangled connections and
Yeah.
deeper intrigue.
It does.
And speaking of scandals,
Right.
the excerpts go on to discuss the BCCI scandal,
Cool.
which exposed the dark underbelly of international banking
Yeah.
and the extent to which financial institutions could be used for criminal activities.
The BCCI scandal was a bombshell revelation. This bank, which had branches all over the world, was involved in everything from money laundering to financing terrorism.
Oh, wow.
It was a truly global operation with ties to powerful figures in governments, intelligence agencies, and organized crime.
So it was essentially a criminal enterprise masquerading as a legitimate bank.
Yeah, pretty much.
How were they able to operate for so long without being detected?
That's the question that investigators struggled with.
Yeah.
It seems that BCCI was able to exploit weaknesses in the global financial system,
Right.
taking advantage of lax regulations and corrupt officials to move vast sums of money around the world.
And the excerpts mention Burt Lance,
Yes.
a close friend of President Jimmy Carter, as
Yeah.
being connected to BCCI.
Okay.
What was his involvement?
Lance had financial dealings with BCCI,
Okay.
and those connections ultimately led to his resignation from his position in the Carter administration.
Oh, wow.
It was a major scandal at the time
Right.
and raised serious concerns about conflicts of interest and the influence of money in politics.
So even someone close to the president was entangled in this web of corruption.
It seems that way.
It seems like no one was immune to the lure of power and money.
The BCCI scandal is a stark reminder of the corrosive influence of corruption
Yeah.
and the dangers of unchecked greed.
Right.
And it's not just about individual actors. It highlights systemic weaknesses
Yeah.
that allowed this kind of criminal enterprise to flourish on a global scale.
And it seems like the BCCI scandal also brought to light the rise of corporate raiders, figures like Victor Posner and Carl Lindner Jr.,
Right.
who utilized aggressive tactics and connections to organized crime to acquire companies.
You're right.
Yep.
These corporate raiders were a product of the 1980s,
Right.
a time of deregulation and unbridled ambition.
Yeah.
They were willing to do whatever it took to amass wealth and power,
Okay.
often exploiting loopholes in the system
Right.
and utilizing connections to organized crime to achieve their goals.
So they were basically using mob tactics to take over companies and make a quick profit.
That's the gist of it.
Okay.
They would use junk bonds, hostile takeovers, and other aggressive financial maneuvers to acquire control of companies,
Right.
often stripping them of their assets
Wow.
and leaving them in ruins.
Wow.
And they weren't afraid to use intimidation and
Yeah.
even violence to get what they wanted.
It sounds like a Wild West mentality applied to the corporate world.
It was a ruthless time.
What was the impact of their activities?
Well, their actions led to the destruction of many companies
Right.
and the loss of countless jobs.
Wow.
They also contributed to a culture of greed and excess
Right.
that ultimately led to the financial crisis of 2008.
So they were essentially profiting from the destruction of American businesses.
In many cases, yes.
Wow.
And their activities highlight the dangers of deregulation and the lack of oversight in the financial world.
Yeah.
It allowed these individuals to manipulate markets and enrich themselves at the expense of others.
It's a reminder that unchecked greed and the pursuit of profit above all else can have devastating consequences.
Absolutely.
And this brings us to the Promise software,
Okay.
a tool originally developed for U.S. intelligence agencies
Right.
that ended up in the hands of Robert Maxwell,
Interesting.
a media mogul and alleged Israeli intelligence asset.
The story of Promise is like something out of a techno thriller.
Yeah.
This software had the ability to track vast amounts of data,
Right.
making it a powerful tool for intelligence gathering and surveillance.
Okay.
And Maxwell, a figure shrouded in mystery and controversy, managed to acquire it and sell it to foreign governments,
Wow.
including some with questionable human rights records.
So this incredibly powerful software capable of tracking people's every move fell into the wrong hands.
It appears so.
What were the implications of that?
Well, it raised serious concerns about the proliferation of surveillance technology and its potential misuse by authoritarian regimes.
Yeah.
Maxwell's actions sparked investigations and accusations,
Okay.
with some alleging that he was acting on behalf of Israeli intelligence.
It sounds like a tangled web of espionage, corporate greed, and international intrigue.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And the story gets even more complicated with the Inslaw affair,
Okay.
which involves allegations of the theft and misuse of promise by the U.S. Department of Justice.
So not only did this powerful software end up in the hands of foreign governments,
Right.
but it was also allegedly misused by the U.S. government itself.
That's what the Inslaw affair suggests.
That's a pretty disturbing thought.
It is.
Yeah.
It certainly raises questions about the accountability of government agencies and the potential for abuse of power.
And the story takes an even darker turn with the investigation of journalist Danny Casolaro,
Okay.
who was looking into an alleged international crime syndicate known as the Octopus.
The octopus.
Yeah.
That sounds ominous.
It does, doesn't it?
What was Castellaro investigating?
Well, he believed that the Octopus was a network of powerful individuals involved in various criminal activities,
Okay.
including arms trafficking, drug smuggling, and money laundering.
Oh, wow.
He saw connections between Promise,
Right.
BCCI, the Iran-Contra affair,
Right.
and other scandals, suggesting that they were all part of a larger conspiracy.
So he was trying to expose this vast criminal network operating at the highest levels of power.
That's what it seems like.
What happened to him?
Well, tragically, Casolaro died under mysterious circumstances before he could finish his investigation.
Oh, wow.
His death was officially ruled a suicide,
Okay.
but many believe that he was murdered to silence him.
His story is a reminder of the risks that journalists face
Yeah.
when they challenge powerful interests and attempt to expose the truth.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
And Casolaro's investigation, although unfinished, highlights the importance of investigative journalism
Absolutely.
and the need for a free press to hold those in power accountable.
Couldn't agree more.
It's clear from these excerpts that these shadowy networks operate in the shadows, often with little accountability.
Yeah.
And as we move closer to the present day, the excerpts examine the Clinton years, focusing on the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, or ADFA,
Right.
and its ties to figures with alleged connections to organized crime.
The ADFA was established during Bill Clinton's governorship of Arkansas.
Right.
And it quickly became embroiled in controversy.
Okay.
The excerpts highlight its dealings with figures like Dan Lassater,
Okay.
a bond dealer who was a close friend of Clinton's, and Jackson Stevens,
Okay.
a powerful Arkansas businessman with connections to the Rayati family,
Okay.
who were involved in the Lippo Group,
Right.
a controversial Indonesian conglomerate.
So the ADFA was making deals with individuals who had ties to organized crime and foreign entities.
That's what the excerpts suggest.
What were they doing?
The ADFA was involved in various financial transactions,
Okay.
including the issuance of bonds and investments in various projects.
Okay.
But the excerpts suggest that some of these dealings were questionable.
In what way?
Well, they raise concerns about potential conflicts of interest and the misuse of public funds.
It sounds like a classic case of corruption, with political connections being used to enrich private individuals.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
And the controversy surrounding the Mena Intermountain Municipal Airport in Arkansas adds another layer of mystery to this story.
Mena Airport. I've
Yeah.
heard that name before.
It's come up a few times.
It has, yeah.
What's the connection to the ADFA and these allegations of corruption?
Well, Mena Airport became a focal point of controversy during Clinton's presidency
Okay.
due to allegations that it was used for drug smuggling and other illicit activities,
Right.
potentially with the knowledge and complicity of state officials.
Yeah, it was quite a scandal.
The excerpts don't provide definitive answers about what exactly happened at Mena Airport,
Right.
but they raise enough questions to suggest that something shady was going on.
They do.
So this small airport in Arkansas became a hub for criminal activity
It seems.
and potentially even involved the future president of the United States.
The allegations are certainly serious,
Yeah.
and they highlight the challenges of uncovering the truth when powerful interests are at stake.
Right.
It's a reminder that official narratives are often incomplete or even deliberately misleading,
Right.
and that it's crucial to consider alternative perspectives and seek independent verification.
It's clear from this deep dive into Whitney Webb's One Nation Under Blackmail
Yeah,
that the connections between intelligence agencies, organized crime, and powerful figures have persisted over decades,
absolutely.
adapting and evolving to new circumstances.
Mm.
It's a complex and often disturbing story
It is.
that raises serious questions about the nature of power, corruption, and the
Right.
pursuit of wealth and influence.
You're absolutely right.
And as we move into the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we'll explore how these connections continue to shape the world we live in today and what the implications are for the future.
It's incredible to think how these networks of power and influence, often operating outside the law, have shaped so much of our history. And you begin to wonder, just how deep does this rabbit hole go?
Exactly. And, you know, as we've been going through these excerpts, I keep thinking about Barry Seal,
Yeah.
the pilot who got caught up in drug trafficking, intelligence operations, and political intrigue.
Yeah.
His story seems to embody so many of the themes we've been discussing.
You're right. Barry Seal's story is a perfect example of how an individual can get caught in the crosshairs of these powerful forces.
Right.
He started as a regular TWA pilot,
Right.
but his skills as a smuggler caught the attention of both drug cartels and the CIA. It's like something out of a movie.
It really is, and the excerpts specifically mention his operations out of Menunny Intermountain Municipal Airport
Yeah.
in Arkansas,
Right.
the airport we were just talking about. It allegedly became a hub for drug smuggling, possibly even with the knowledge of Bill Clinton, who was the governor of Arkansas at the time.
Seal's activities at Medina Airport
Right,
and the alleged involvement of Clinton
right.
raised serious questions about the extent to which political figures were aware of or even facilitated these illegal operations.
Right.
It makes you think about the potential for corruption and the abuse of power when law enforcement and intelligence agencies turn a blind eye to criminal activity,
Right.
perhaps for political gain.
It's a disturbing thought, and it seems like Seal's story didn't end there.
Yeah.
The excerpts say he eventually became a DEA informant,
Right.
but his involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, where he
Yeah.
allegedly flew arms to Nicaragua for the Contras,
Right.
ultimately led to his assassination.
Seal's death, while officially attributed to Colombian drug traffickers, has been the subject of much speculation.
Right.
Some believe that he was eliminated because he knew too much
Right.
and posed a threat to powerful individuals involved in the Iran-Contra scandal.
It's like something straight out of a spy thriller.
It is.
He was caught in this dangerous web of espionage, drug trafficking, and covert operations where loyalties shift and the line between right and wrong is blurred.
Seal's life and death serve as a stark reminder of the human costs of these shadowy operations.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in the complexities of these networks,
Right.
but ultimately, real people's lives are affected,
Mhm.
often with devastating consequences.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
And as we've gone through these excerpts, it's clear that these connections between intelligence agencies, organized crime,
Yeah.
and powerful figures have persisted over time, evolving and adapting to new circumstances.
Absolutely.
They've influenced political decisions,
Yeah.
economic policies, and even social trends.
You hit the nail on the head. This deep dive has only scratched the surface of a much larger and more complex story.
Right.
It's a story of ambition, greed, corruption, and the abuse of power. But it's also a story about the pursuit of truth, holding those in power accountable, and understanding the forces that shape our world.
It's been a truly eye-opening experience.
Yeah.
Makes you question everything you thought you knew about how the world works.
And that's precisely the point.
Right.
This deep dive is meant to be a starting point,
Right.
a catalyst for further exploration and critical thinking.
You've given me a lot to think about, that's for sure.
Good.
I'm definitely going to be doing some more research on my own to dig deeper into some of these topics. I feel like I've only just begun to understand the complexity of it all.
And remember, knowledge is power. But understanding that knowledge, connecting the dots, and seeing the bigger picture is what truly matters.
Right.
We live in a world awash in information, and being able to discern truth from manipulation is more crucial than ever.
Well said. This deep dive has been a fascinating and thought-provoking journey. It's shown us that the world is not always what it seems, and that there are forces operating behind the scenes that we need to be aware of.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining me on this exploration, and until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.